Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Here's the compilation of some of Pryor's famous sayings. We got the quite honestly, and then just some of the other things that he said kind of off it. Quite honestly was the top. Going through all of it over and really paying attention to what he said, because every time he would say like things twice, I tried to record it to see how many times he would say it, and quite honestly was the most. That's number one. That was his famous. And then there's a couple other things that he said kind of often. So I'm going to play you that compilation.
Quite honestly, if he's talking as Mr. Boudreaux is one of those folks that he gained information from, I think it is relevant, and I think quite honestly it's permissible inquiry in this particular case. Well, Judge, quite honestly, I'm not necessarily seeking the exact information that those particular witnesses provided to this officer. I think quite honestly, I ought to be able to ask some very basic questions about what witnesses he interviewed as part of that investigation. And I think quite honestly, I don't know if Mr. Wood doesn't want to give me the information, or if quite honestly, he doesn't get it both ways. He doesn't get to say, I'm going to have this officer talk in great detail about every facet of this case. He doesn't get it both ways. But quite honestly, Judge, I'm dumbfounded, and quite honestly, it was absolutely unresponsive. And quite honestly, I'm somewhat frustrated with his method of avoiding answering my question and yet getting in all sorts of additional information. So I'd like this witness directed to answer my questions. And quite honestly, Judge, they don't even come close on the concealment of Tylee. They don't even come close on the concealment of JJ, and the conspiracy, they lack the agreement. And quite honestly, Judge, if this is what the evidence is in terms of an overt act, but quite honestly, there's a lot of information here, is there not? But I think quite honestly, I'm using this as a way of trying to find out exactly how familiar she is with Mr. Daybell. She made a number of statements, and quite honestly, I think I ought to be able to inquire about, how much does she know about Mr. Daybell? I think that's perfectly relevant. Angel Maroney or something like that. And I think quite honestly, I ought to be able to inquire. The tape was played. It was presented as evidence.
Okay, so the next compilation is him saying, I think I ought to be able to inquire. Or sometimes he just says, I think I oughta. Sometimes he says, like, I think I should be able to, and just certain sentences like that. So, and I'll add a couple would it surprise yous at the end. Here it is.
Quite honestly, I think I ought to be able to inquire about, I think that's perfectly relevant. I think I'm perfectly within my right to inquire about that. And I think I ought to be able to inquire as to where, Judge, he testified about his experience. I think I ought to be able to inquire as to whether it's easily identifiable. And I think I ought to be able to inquire into that. I think I ought to be given the leeway for at least one very simple question, Judge. I think I ought to get some leeway to do that. I think I ought to delve into that. I think I ought to be able to inquire in that a little bit. I think I ought to be able to inquire as to what I think I ought to be able to inquire that, and I think I need to be able to go into that. I think I'm allowed to inquire about that. I don't see that that's necessarily irrelevant. I think it's perfectly permissible. I think quite honestly, I ought to be able to ask some very basic questions. Clearly, I ought to be allowed to inquire as to, I think I can inquire as to, I think I ought to be able to inquire that, and I think I need to be able to go into that. I think it's proper examination. And I think I'm perfectly within my right to inquire about that. And I think quite honestly, I ought to be able to inquire, and I think I at least ought to inquire, what would it surprise you to learn that, would it surprise you that that area is almost 20 by 20? Would it surprise you to learn that that pet cemetery is over 20 by 20? Would it surprise you to learn that I talk an awful lot about incorrect things? And you can't get Lori Vallow out of my mind. Would you have any reason to disagree with that, ma'am?
Okay, so next I'm going to play some clips of the judge telling Pryor that he can't hear him to adjust his mic.
Mr. Pryor, will you pull that microphone a little closer to you again?
I'm going to do that a million times. It's very difficult.
It's all right. I'll keep reminding you.
Thank you.
Mr. Pryor, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Do you mind pulling your microphone down and then aiming it up at your chin? So there you go. Mr. Pryor, in looking at some of the recording last night, I noticed that the one audio that we couldn't hear very well was yours. So again, if you don't mind making your microphone look like this, it will record it a lot better if it's pointed at your chin. I know it looks weird. That's the way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Judge. Okay.
If you could speak a little closer to your mic.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me that.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Pryor, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Do you mind pulling your microphone down and then aiming it up at your chin? Mr. Pryor, if you'll speak up just a little bit, I'm having
Sorry, just
difficulty.
clarification, Annette.
Can you speak a little louder?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Will you pull that
Tell me,
microphone?
What date and time did you review that?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Did you have an occasion to talk to Mr. Daybell at any time?
Yes, if you could speak a little closer to your mic.
Okay, I will. Where were
So
you,
were
in Utah?
Oh, hold up. So, Mr. Pryor, you're interrupting the witness before she can answer
I
the question.
apologize, Your Honor.
We're making a record here, so it's crucial that nobody talk over each other. So, Mr. Pryor, I want you to make an effort here to let the witness finish the answer before you ask the next question.
So the last little compilation I'm going to show you is Melanie Gibbs basically standing her ground and not backing down to Pryor. I know I didn't get all of the times that she was doing that because when I was going through it, that's not what I was specifically looking for. So yeah, here's just a few of them.
So I noticed you just took a look at Mr. Wood. Is there a reason why you just did that?
I looked around.
Oh, you looked around?
Mhm. I didn't actually look at his face.
Okay. Just over in that direction. So why don't you tell me what the religious nature of this preparedness camp is, ma'am?
People sharing their spiritual experiences,
Okay.
scriptural based to personal dreams.
Does it have a
I'm
specific?
just checking my mind with my dates. I believe so.
Is there anything that you have in terms of a medical condition that affects your ability to recollect anything, ma'am?
No,
Is there any condition such as an auditory disorder that you've been diagnosed with that affects your ability to understand and hear things?
no,
You've never been medically diagnosed with an auditory disorder?
no.
Okay. Hands.
Your client was one of those people that spoke at that, and he was
Okay, well, I
expressing
didn't
his
ask the
visions
judge.
and dreams.
I'm going to move to strike. The question is what's the religious undertone? It's not what my client participated, ma'am. It's what is the undertone of this? So I'd like you to answer my question as opposed to pushing some blame on my client. So would you answer the question?
Objection, this is
So
argumentative.
you don't remember even talking to them.
I remember talking to them.
You just don't know what month it was.
I want to be accurate, so I don't remember.
Okay. Okay. So in 2000, was that in Arizona?
No, as you recall, I said St. George, Utah.
That was on the 26th of 2018 in St. George. That's correct. Okay. You shared your belief about having visions about things that may happen in the future, correct?
Not my visions, not her visions.
Okay. But you're not in disbelief about having visions about things, are you?
I'm not in disbelief.
Right. In July of 2017 in Ogden, Utah, is that correct?
In Morgan, Utah, yes, that's correct.
Morgan, Utah?
Mhm.
Is Morgan close to Ogden? Is there a reason
Yes.
why you're not saying yes?
Well, it's just a big word to say you're sisters with somebody. I haven't known her for very long, so it's only been a few months.
Okay. Mr. Warwick is a writer as well?
No,
Oh, I was under the impression he was an author as well. He wrote some things. That's incorrect?
incorrect.
Okay. That's a very broad range.
I know.
Are you having difficulty remembering when you spoke with an FBI agent?
Yes,
And is it your common practice to regularly speak with FBI agents? Is that why you can't remember that you spoke with one?
Objection,
wasn't
compound,
common.
I'm sorry.
and argumentative.
Sustained on the
Also
argumentative.
a discussion about potential difficulties you might have as a result of lying to the Gilbert Police Department.
No,
There was never any reference or any offer of any deal to testify about anything, and they would forego going after you for lying to a police officer.
no,
And you've never been offered anything by anyone in regards to the fact that you lied about, or at least you.
Objection, asked and answered.
Mr. Pryor,
I judge it's a different question. It's a
I-
slightly different question.
I'll allow you to ask the question.
So again, Mr. Wood has never specifically offered you any deal to testify in any manner in this case. Is that correct?
never.
Okay. And when you came into town, when did you arrive in town this week?
Saturday.
Okay. Did you have a meeting with Mr. Wood prior to testifying today?
Yes,
Did he tell you what to say on the stand?
no,
Did he coach you in any way?
no,
Did he ask you to testify in a certain manner or wear a certain amount of clothes a certain way?
no.
He didn't tell you anything.
We talked about a lot of things.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get into. It wasn't the weather, was it, ma'am?
No,
It was about how and what you were going to say in this hearing today, correct?
he asked me questions and I gave him answers.
Do you know whether or not that recording, that conversation was recorded or not?
I have no idea.
So if what you're telling me is
I
that.
cannot recall. There was several people going in and out. It was a busy kind of a
Where did this-
movement.
I'm sorry again. And where did this interview take place?
Alrighty, guys, that's the end of the compilation. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully, you guys are all having a good night, a good weekend, and yeah, hopefully, we'll chat soon. Bye, guys.